a 6-year-old girl, Hind Rajab, infamously killed in a car with her 4 cousins, her uncle and aunt, all killed by an Israeli tank that was firing at them. She makes a 911 call. Very, very tragic, horrific call. They send 2 paramedics, the Palestinians, to rescue her. The Israelis kill the paramedics as well in the ambulance. How do you defend that, Joe?
I don't. You
do. I've got a quote from you that says, Israel deserves immense praise for winning this war as carefully as they can. Would you say that?
Look, I defend the way Israel... Let me finish.
In abstract, which is why I get specific.
No, I know
how people do this. Abstract.
No.
Specific.
So let me address both.
Yeah.
I agree.
Right, let's have it out then, yeah? Since October 2023, the world's been kicking off over one big question. Is Israel's response to the Palestinian resistance's surprise attack actually proportional? Or have they just gone completely overboard? Now, you've got 2 camps here, both arguing like their lives depend on it. On one side, you've got the pro-Israel crowd swearing blind that what Israel's done to Gaza is just fair payback. They say if you come swinging at Israel, don't be surprised when Israel swings back twice as hard. On the other side, you've got the critics, the ones who reckon what's happening in Gaza isn't just a military response, but an outright genocide happening right under everyone's noses. They argue that Israel isn't just fighting terror, it's turning Gaza into a wasteland where no one can live, pushing people to either flee or perish. And let's be honest, looking at the state of Gaza right now, it's not exactly hard to see why they think that. Now, the first group, the pro-Israel lot, they're sticking to their guns. They'll tell you that Israel is just defending itself, that its strikes are all about stopping terrorism. They won't hear a word about genocide. In fact, they'd rather chew glass than admit Israel's actions might be crossing that line. And why? Well, it's simple. The second they admit Israel's hitting civilian targets, like schools, hospitals, refugee camps, it's game over for them. It's like handing critics the smoking gun. That's why you'll hear them say stuff like, "Oh, Israel's being careful. They're only hitting legitimate targets," even though every other day you hear about another school or hospital getting bombed to rubble. The last thing they want is to give anyone evidence that could be used to hammer the IDF in court or the court of public opinion. At OMT News, we're dedicated to bringing you sharp, no-nonsense analysis on the conflicts shaping Palestine, Lebanon, and beyond. In a world where propaganda drowns out truth and narratives are manipulated to fit political agendas, we refuse to take the easy route. We don't do spin. We don't take sides. We dig deep, call out hypocrisy, and break down the complexities others ignore. But independent reporting like this doesn't thrive without your support. If you value balanced, unfiltered discussion, don't let efforts to silence voices like ours win. Like and share this video to push back against the algorithm and IDF internet bots. Subscribe to stay ahead of the conversation.
Condemn, yes. Do you condemn?
But you're not condemning Israeli war crimes. That's what I don't understand. You're trying to dodge it with whataboutism about Hamas. It's a very simple question. I can keep going. Let's play a clip here. Let's play a clip for you to watch. We got a clip of a grandmother. Here's a grandmother. Maybe you're not aware of this one. This is a Palestinian grandmother in her 50s. She's holding a child, right, in her arm. He's got a white flag. She's shot in cold blood by an Israeli sniper who's...
Maddie, I don't know what the hell that was. That's not... How do I know?
It's a sniper who shot at a Palestinian grandmother.
Maddie, you invite me on, you show me a clip of that, and you tell me what it is. I'm sorry, okay, I'm not familiar with that. Okay? I'd like to know what that is. I'm not familiar with that.
You know I can go through multiple examples, right? You know that. I can start reading multiple examples. The Al-Dos family in Gaza, whose apartment building was bombed. We can go through each and every example.
But where you and I will disagree is this. And I'm telling you, this is ugly, and it's horrible, and it's unfortunate.
It's war crimes.
It's not Israel's policy to target civilians. Israel has gone out of their way not to. They are fighting an opposition, Mehdi, that has a history of doing the exact opposite.
You say they don't have a policy of doing that.
And see, you won't acknowledge that. Can you say yes or no to that?
What, yes or no to?
Does Hamas have a history of doing the exact opposite? Does Hamas
has a history. Hold on.
Target Israeli civilians?
Hamas has, yes, it has in the past. For example, when I was a teenager, I was condemning bus bombings, if you remember, in the 90s, right? But hold on.
As a policy,
this is
though,
pure
Mehdi.
whataboutism, Joe.
No, it's not. It is. As a policy. That's the policy of Hamas. The governing entity of Gaza.
I'm the only one here who has condemned civilian killings on both sides. You've called it a mistake, which I find grotesque. Let me read to you about Israeli policy. This is from Haaretz last year, Israeli newspaper. You're saying you're not aware of this. Let me tell you this. An Israeli soldier relays that a senior commander asked him to shoot an unarmed man with a white flag. He said he's got a white flag. He says, "I don't care. Shoot him. It's an order." Another Israeli soldier told Plus 972 there were no restrictions on ammunition. We could just shoot to relieve our boredom. We don't need to explain. You just shoot. When soldiers see someone approaching, it's permissible to shoot them. We can shoot a young girl, an old woman. This is testimony from Israeli soldiers, Joe, that it's a free fire zone. They can shoot and kill whoever they want. That is a policy. That is a war crime, and many would argue that's genocide. That is what you're defending today, which is kind of sad.
Do you believe... Answer this question.
No.
I'm saying I condemn that. And
finally, it's a war crime. It's easy to say I condemn it.
No, man.
Why won't you call it a war crime? I'll say what Hamas did on October 7th was a war crime. Will you say what I've described a war crime?
Everyone's
watching. I'm the only one condemning war crimes on all sides.
Maybe a war crime. I don't trust some international group who
You don't trust Palestinians who talk about being raped
I
and
don't
tortured
trust
in
an
captivity.
international group with an inherent anti-Israel bias to tell me that's a war crime.
Is the International Criminal
Israel,
Court
by the way,
anti-Israel bias?
Oh, God, yeah. Like the
What's the
UN
evidence?
has. Like the UN has an
You
interest.
just made a claim. This is very Trumpy right now, just throwing things around. What is the ICC's evidence of anti-Semitism?
Do me a favor, do me one favor. Don't call it Trumpian. Don't call it MAGA.
Because it's so fascinating to see that you are borrowing.
I think the United Nations has an anti-Israel bias.
That's a different answer. I said, is the ICC. Where's the ICC's anti-Israel bias?
That's not Trumpian.
I don't want to debate that right now. I'm asking Israel, because it's a long debate. This is a very simple one. Where's your evidence of ICC anti-Israel bias? Most of the people they've indicted are African leaders. They haven't indicted anyone from Israel ever. They also indicted Hamas commanders.
Because I do not believe Israel's committing a genocide, and I think they were out of line saying that Israel's committing a genocide.
ICC never said they're committing a genocide.
What ICC said?
The International Criminal Court said he's guilty. They charged him
with war crimes,
with willful killing of civilians and starvation.
Charge 2.
Right? And guess who backed them up?
Charge
guess who
2.
was their advisor?
Charge
Theodore
2.
Myron.
Charge 2.
Holocaust survivor.
Charge 2.
Israeli
Netanyahu.
judge. Is he anti-Israel as well?
Charge 2. Netanyahu.
They charged Netanyahu and Gallant.
You think Benjamin Netanyahu and Gallant have purposely tried to destroy, kill, and starve?
That is what the evidence that the ICC have amassed.
That's what the ICC has
And your argument is, instead of engaging with the evidence, like the evidence I've given you, is to say that, hold on, let me finish that, anti-Israel bias. That's just Trumpian.
You're
not engaging in the facts.
Because you know what you've done? You know what you've done again? You're not the ICC, I'm not. You know what you've done? This is what you do. I love you, you're great, but you will grab example after example, and you'll tell me that factual instances, and you'll tell me this is proof that this is Israel's policy. And I'm telling you,
just read out to you what soldiers say is Israel's
policy is not to target and wipe out and destroy.
And the difference between me and you is you're just opining and I'm giving evidence. How do you know it?
I've
given you an example.
You're giving me examples.
So far, since this interview began, I've read out to you what the Deputy Speaker said, which you condemned. I've read out to you about a kid being killed, which you apparently... Let me finish. You keep interrupting me and say I'm interrupting you.
Bullshit.
A kid being killed, you've condemned it. I've shown you a video of a grandmother being killed. You said you don't know anything about it. I've read out quotes from Israeli soldiers, and I've quoted the International Freaking Criminal Court. And you said... They're just anti-Israel.
Tell me
that does sound Trumpy.
Well, they are anti-Israel. I've condemned
I'll
every.
Stay here all day. Where's your evidence that the ICC is anti-Israel?
I'll condemn every example you've given me.
Where is the evidence ICC is anti-Israel?
My evidence that they're not is the way that Israel has conducted this war. Period. Trying to move civilians out of the way. Leaflets to notify civilians to get out. We're going to bomb here. Going out of the way. Clearing hospitals.
They destroyed most of the hospitals in Gaza. Just stop this.
Why did they destroy hospitals?
You haven't answered my question.
Have they not given warning?
It's very funny that you haven't answered my question, but I'm going to go back to. You've known me for years. I'm going to go back to it. What's your evidence that the International Criminal Court has an anti-Israel bias?
I think they've exhibited anti-Israel bias because I do not believe the evidence they presented justified that willfully Netanyahu and Gallant committed war crimes.
You've read all the evidence. The evidence is there.
I got to go back, but yeah, I read a lot of it.
Their legal advisor,
I do not
the
believe,
guy who supported them,
the
guy who supported them is a man named Judge Theodore Myron, who's a Holocaust survivor and an Israeli judge. He said
I'd feel the same.
These charges. Is he anti-Israel as well?
I'd feel this.
No, but is he anti-Israel as well? You don't say you disagree with the court. You go for this lazy, they're anti-Israel, they're anti-Semitic.
I do disagree with the court.
That's fine. But what's the evidence that they're anti-Israel?
I think they've always said.
It's just a conspiracy. It's just ad hominem. And that's why I say it sounds Trumpy. You just throw out anti-Israel. Based on what? You've got no evidence. I consider all day. What's your evidence for the ICC?
Because I think they had it in for Netanyahu.
Based on what? Who cares what you think? What's your evidence?
I got to go back. When I look at what was put forward.
They've charged mostly African leaders, and in this case, they've charged Hamas and Israel. And your argument is, instead of engage with the copious evidence that the prosecutors brought, that the judges have supported.
You look at the way Israel.
The evidence is there. You don't want to hear starvation.
You look at the way
they're starving people in Gaza. Are they starving people in Gaza?
What would you? Answer me something.
No, I'm not here to answer your question, Joe.
No, they're not starving people
So Cindy
in Gaza.
McCain, is she anti-Israel as well? The head of the World Food Programme. Widow of the most pro-Israel senator in our lifetime. She has said that people are starving to death in Gaza. They're blocking our aid trucks.
Whose
she
fault
lying?
is that?
Is she lying, Cindy McCain? She's blaming Israel. Is she lying?
People in Gaza may be starving.
Is she lying is what I asked.
No, well, let me... Damn it, Mehdi, would
Answer
you
the
ask
question.
a fuck? Then don't ask it 4 times. Yes,
Answer it the first time and I don't have to repeat it.
Do me a favor, stop, let me speak.
Please.
Yes, there's starvation in Gaza, but gosh darn it, Israel has gone out of their way to allow aid in. And who's stopped the aid? I mean, for 2-3 years, who's robbed the aid trucks and all the aid coming in? Hamas, terrorists.
According to the US government, the Biden administration you supported, they didn't present evidence of Hamas stealing
gosh,
aid.
yes, they
There were
did.
criminal gangs that Israel actually supports, according to the Israeli press. But let me ask you this, because you're very supportive of Israel. That's why I want to do this interview, and then you don't want to actually defend them. You want to make it about Hamas. Just before, I got to ask you this.
I do. No, stop. I defend the way Israel's fought this war.
Even though,
period.
Even though every example I've given, you say you condemn it, but at the end you still support
Even though
them.
there are examples of outrageous and atrocious behavior.
I had Ehud Olmert.
It's not the policy of the IDF
I've
to
had
do this.
Ehud Olmert. By the way, whether it's your policy or not, a war crime is a war crime, Joe, by the way, just to break that to you. It doesn't matter what your policy is. If you commit a war crime, that's a crime. That's just so you know international law. I've had Ehud Olmert on the show, former Prime Minister of Israel. I've had Ami Ayalon on the show, former head of Shin Bet, on that screen. And they've supported Israel, but they've also criticized Israel's in many ways, in a way I don't hear someone like you criticizing Israel. You tweeted recently, I'll swim across the ocean to defend Israel. You're very gung-ho in your support for Israel in a way that Israelis are not. They're like, our country is messing up big time. And then there's you. I haven't heard you criticize so many things Israel are doing. You are today because I've asked you to. But I went through your Twitter thread. I went through your Twitter, Joe.
No.
Let me just ask you.
Mehdi,
I just want to ask, just want to check your views.
I don't.
So let's check, so viewers know your views. So
Generally, I don't.
You don't criticize
ahead.
Israel?
No, I will, but generally I don't.
So, for example, 40,000 Palestinians in the West Bank have been driven from their homes. The Israelis said you can't come back. That's a war crime. Do you condemn that? Just in the last few weeks. Do you criticize that?
What do you mean they've been driven from their homes?
They've been pushed out by the Israeli military. 40,000 people, the size of a town in your old district in Illinois, just gone. And they've been told you cannot come back. Netanyahu's sitting in their house in a photo. You would go mad if Vladimir Putin was sitting in a Ukrainian home.
Mehdi, I don't understand what... Pull back for a minute. After October 7th, what would you have had Israel?
The West Bank has nothing to do with October 7th. That's why I specifically asked about the West Bank, because I know you're obsessed with going back to October 7th. Hamas as if the world began.
I'm sorry.
The West Bank.
Stop.
Hamas does not run the West Bank.
I didn't know you were talking about the West Bank.
I'm talking about the West Bank. 40,000 people driven from their homes by violent settlers. You've been watching the violent settlers, crazy people. I assume you don't agree with them. They make Marjorie Taylor Greene and Trump look moderate, the far-right Israeli settlers.
They are as close as we've got to radical Islamist terrorists.
And they are driving people out of their homes, 40,000 people. Do you condemn that? I've not seen you say a word about that on your social media and your shows. That's happening right now. I don't hear you criticizing Israel for it.
I don't.
You don't criticize Israel for driving 40,000 people from their homes?
No, I don't. Look, Israel has to... They're not going to make the same mistake they made in Gaza. They're
doing exactly what they did in Gaza, actually. They're displacing people from their homes.
What do you mean
Mass
they're doing what they did
displacement.
in Gaza?
Well, 1 million people have been driven from their homes in Gaza.
Because
now
why?
we have 50,000 people.
Why?
Because Israel is breaking international law.
Oh, not because the ruling governing entity of Gaza declared war on Israel on October 7th.
Even if that were
And let's talk about that now famous debate between Mehdi Hassan and Joe Walsh. Honestly, it was brutal. These two couldn't be further apart if they tried. Walsh was standing firm with the pro-Israel crowd, basically saying, look, the IDF is doing what it has to do. If there's anyone to blame for the death toll, it's the Palestinian resistance. Walsh's whole stance was that Israel's hands are clean, that they're just doing what any country would do to protect its people. Meanwhile, Hassan came in swinging and tore that argument to pieces. His rebuttal's been all over the internet, especially in Britain. And it wasn't just because he was loud or dramatic. It was because he was calm, sharp, and made points that were hard to argue with. Walsh, though, mate, he looked like he was trying to juggle knives. He wanted to defend human rights, or at least pretend to. But he also didn't want to criticize Israel too harshly. So, he ended up dancing around the real questions. He didn't want to come out and say, yeah, Israel's committed crimes. But at the same time, he kept insisting that Israel's been careful and deliberate with its strikes, trying to avoid civilian casualties. And honestly, that's where he lost the plot. Because anyone who's been paying attention knows that Gaza has been hammered, and it's not just terrorists getting hit. We're talking about children, doctors, families, entire buildings reduced to rubble.
If Israel wanted to exterminate the Palestinian people,
Yeah.
they could have done it in 3 months.
That's the worst argument you've ever made in all the time I've made. I'll tell you
Correct.
why. Vladimir Putin could have erased everyone in Ukraine with a nuke.
No.
Yes, he could.
Oh, God, no.
Yes, he could.
Well, with a nuke.
Yeah.
But with a nuke, then...
No, hold on. Your argument is Israel is not genocidal because they haven't killed everyone in Gaza and they could. I'm saying Vladimir Putin could kill everyone in Ukraine and he hasn't. Therefore, according to Joe Walsh's logic, Vladimir Putin is not genocidal.
A different situation in this degree. Israel is capable. From day one, they were capable.
As is Putin.
Well, only with nukes. Israel is fighting another sovereign nation with a full-on military, with the support of the world community. Ukraine.
Oh,
Right,
you meant Russia, you said Israel.
Oh, I'm
You
sorry,
said Russia,
I'm
yes.
sorry. So Russia literally has an opposing army, supported that.
But it could wipe it out. And by the way, the definition of genocide is not to kill everyone in a place.
Mehdi,
you know this, right?
I do.
They don't have to kill everyone to be genocidal.
Oh, I know that. But Mehdi...
But what they've done meets many of the criteria of genocide, which is why they're in front of the ICJ, which is why some of the leading genocide scholars in the world are saying it's a genocide.
No.
Omar Bartov, Israeli Holocaust historian. Amos Goldberg, Israeli Holocaust historian. Daniel Blatvik, Israeli Holocaust. They all say it's genocide. Are they crazy? These people study this for a living, Joe.
But do you...
Not you and me.
No, I know that, and I respect those opinions, but I don't think that's the majority view. But secondly, going back to Russia...
Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, all say genocide.
Well, again...
Human rights groups... Israeli Holocaust historians, Joe Walsh. With respect. What do you know that they don't know?
With respect.
With respect.
I'm sure it's more than Joe Walsh. But again, just to get back to Russia on this point, Mehdi, so Russia would be forced to use a nuke because Russia is fighting literally an army.
But they could, is what I'm saying. People were worried about Putin using nukes.
But a nuke then would mean the destruction of Russia. That's a whole different equation. Israel doesn't have to use a nuke, and they didn't from day one, to get rid of the Palestinian people.
But they have made life uninhabitable. It's not a hypothetical. Right now, as of right now, Gaza is uninhabitable. Donald Trump says so, the President of the United States. In fact, let me show you. I think we've got some footage. I'd love to get your response to this footage, because Gaza, over the last 16 months, have a look at the screen, has suffered an apocalyptic level of destruction. This is a recent drone video from January. 70% of the buildings destroyed. Look at that imagery. That is not an anti-terror operation. That is not just targeting Hamas. That is, look at the imagery. That is something out of, I don't even know is that Mad Max movie? It's entirety destruction. If that's not genocidal, I don't know what is. I haven't seen scenes like that in Ukraine, maybe in one town, Mariupol, but I haven't seen the entire Gaza Strip.
Mehdi, by every measurement of urban warfare, Israel has
Please don't give me a talking point, Joe.
No, I'm not. I'm looking at that.
Respond to the footage.
I'm responding to the footage.
You don't give a damn about that.
No, I do. Don't say that.
Well,
I do give a damn.
Engage with
I
it.
do
Please
give
don't
a
give me
damn.
some talking about urban warfare stats.
No, it is.
I know the stats. I can give you stats. I'm asking you to respond to that footage.
Agreed. And
entire cities and towns wiped
Gaza
out.
needs to be rebuilt.
That's
no
not
doubt.
engaging with the footage.
No, it is.
What is your human reaction to seeing entire towns, cities, refugee camps wiped out?
My reaction is that really sucks. That's horrible. That needs to be rebuilt. But I'm not going to lay the lion's share of the blame on Israel.
The people who wiped that out. The people who chose to drop 2,000-pound bombs on civilian homes, apartments, buildings.
I'm going to lay the lion's share of the blame on Hamas for starting the war on October 7th, knowing exactly what would happen, hiding for years behind their civilians, putting their civilians in harm's way. I'm not going to blame the army.
It's a very strange argument that says they started a war knowing that would happen. So so hold on. So if I start a fight with a known gangster or murderer, and he kills a bunch of my family in response, it's my fault?
Oh.
No, seriously, the law, it's a very strange argument.
Yes.
You're basically conceding that Israel was going to respond in a genocidal way. That's what you're saying. You're saying Hamas started knowing Israel would do that. That doesn't make it morally right what Israel did.
I'm not conceding that's a genocidal way.
What is that? What is that imagery in your eyes? I'm trying to understand what is that imagery.
That is a horrible result.
That is something we've not seen in modern wars. I mean, what they've done in Gaza, other military commanders, you know this, Joe, including the US, have said, we would never do this.
And Hassan wasn't having any of it. He basically called Walsh out for living in some fantasy land, refusing to accept the reality of what's been going on. Because, let's be real, if nearly 40,000 civilians have been killed, can anyone seriously argue that this is about surgical, targeted strikes? The numbers don't lie. And sure, Walsh kept saying things like, well, Hamas is hiding among civilians, but come on. How many hospitals and refugee camps have to be bombed before people start asking real questions? At what point do we stop pretending it's just about targeting militants and start admitting there's something much darker going on? And that's the thing, isn't it? This whole idea that Israel's been careful feels a bit hollow when you look at the scale of destruction. We're not talking about a few stray missiles here. We're talking about systematic, relentless bombing that's left entire neighborhoods in ruins. And yet, Walsh was still trying to play it like Israel's got clean hands. It's like he's clinging to this idea that as long as Israel says it's fighting terror, that justifies whatever happens next. But Hassan flipped that on its head. He wasn't just emotional. He was making a logical argument. He was saying, look, you can't just keep using Hamas as a shield to justify killing civilians. At some point, you've got to take responsibility for your actions. And that's the crux of the whole debate, really. At what point do you stop blaming the other side and start looking at your own decisions? Now, Walsh might be comfortable living in his little bubble, but reality is a harsh thing. Because whether people want to admit it or not, the death toll, the destruction, the displacement, it's all on the record. It's not opinion, it's fact. And as long as Israel keeps claiming it's the victim while dropping bombs on schools and hospitals, more people are going to start questioning that narrative. And here's another thing to think about. If Israel really wanted to fight terror and not destroy Gaza, wouldn't there be more effort to actually protect civilians? Wouldn't they be doing more to avoid turning entire districts into rubble? Because right now, it's hard to argue that this is about just fighting Hamas. When you look at what's left of Gaza, it feels more like a campaign to make the place unlivable, to push people out by making life there impossible. And if that's the case, it's not self-defense, it's ethnic cleansing. So yeah, the debate between Hassan and Walsh wasn't just about two guys arguing on TV. It was about two very different ways of looking at the world. One side wants to pretend everything's black and white. Israel is defending itself, end of story. The other side says, hang on, it's not that simple. You can't flatten an entire city and call that proportional. In the end, it's not about picking sides just for the sake of it. It's about looking at the facts and asking the hard questions. If we keep excusing mass civilian deaths as just collateral damage, where does it end? How many more have to die before the world calls it what it really is? That's the conversation we should be having. Not about who's got the better excuses, but about what kind of world we want to live in.